As we get closer to the One Piece finale, there's a question that has been debated in the fandom for years but has flared up even more recently. Will Luffy end the story with someone, or even get married? That's exactly what I focused on in this video. I researched one by one the most talked about, most upvoted, and most strongly defended theories online, especially on Reddit, forums, and fandom discussions. The picture that emerged was very clear. There were 4 names that stood out above the rest. In this video, we'll go through these 4 theories in order and in detail what the fandom says and where I personally stand, explaining my own opinion openly. Because to me, this isn't just a ship debate. It's closely tied to what kind of life Luffy chooses at the end of his journey. If you enjoy One Piece theories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. The Nami theory is, by far, one of the most widely supported views online whenever the topic of who Luffy might end up with comes up. On Reddit, forums, YouTube comments, and polls, you keep seeing the same result. A huge portion of fans pair Luffy with Nami. And the reason for this is actually pretty clear. Throughout the story, Nami is the character who stays closest to Luffy, spends the most time with him, and forms the strongest emotional bond. From the very beginning of the series, she's been by Luffy's side, and that naturally creates the expectation of, will they end up together? In many people's minds. The strongest argument from Nami supporters is this. In many of the most critical moments of Luffy's journey, Nami is there. Arlong Park, Alabasta, Anis Lobby, Whole Cake Island. In these moments, Nami isn't just his navigator. Sometimes she's a friend, sometimes a protector, sometimes simply the person standing next to him. Especially what happens in Arlong Park is still seen as a massive turning point in the fandom. After that arc, many people stopped viewing the Luffy-Nami relationship as a standard crewmate bond and started seeing it as something much more special. But when it comes to my own perspective, this is where I draw a clear line. I see the bond between Nami and Luffy not as romantic, but as a very strong friendship and partnership. We've watched hundreds of anime episodes and read hundreds of manga chapters, and throughout all of that, I've always coded this duo in my mind as 2 extremely close friends. They're loyal enough to risk their lives for each other, but that bond never felt like it was heading toward romance. On the contrary, I feel like the strength of their relationship comes precisely from the fact that it isn't romantic. There's also this. If there's one thing Oda has consistently emphasized in the One Piece world, it's keeping romance within the crew deliberately in the background. The dynamic between Nami and Luffy feels like a perfect example of that. There's teasing, there's arguing, there's sacrifice, but there's no romantic tension. If we suddenly saw a scene at the end like, and then they got married, it would honestly feel a bit forced to me. Because so far, we haven't seen clear groundwork pointing in that direction. So even though the Nami theory is incredibly popular in the fandom, it's the one I personally agree with the least among these 4. I find it much more meaningful for Nami and Luffy's story to end not with love, but with friendship, trust, and shared companionship. Them not ending up together doesn't weaken their bond, it actually makes it stronger. For me, Nami shouldn't be Luffy's spouse, but remain one of the most important companions in his life. The Boa Hancock theory is, for me, both the most fun and the one that feels closest to canon, because unlike the other theories, there's one undeniable fact here. Boa Hancock is the only character who is openly in love with Luffy. And this isn't some subtle hint or shy admiration, it goes all the way to direct marriage proposals. That's why whenever the question, if Luffy ends up with someone, who would it be, comes up, Hancock's name always stands out very strongly. The reason the fandom takes Hancock so seriously is exactly this. Throughout One Piece, the number of characters who have romantic feelings for Luffy is extremely small, and Hancock is unquestionably number 1. And while her feelings initially start as a comedic gag, over time they evolve into genuine loyalty and devotion. Everything Hancock risks for Luffy, from Impel Down to Marineford and beyond, goes far beyond simple comedy. It's part of her character growth. As for my personal opinion, I'm very clear on this one. If Luffy were ever to get married or build a life with someone after his adventure ends, I would want that person to be Boa Hancock. And it's not just because Hancock is in love with him. Boa Hancock is strong, charismatic, entertaining, and capable of matching Luffy's energy. To be with someone like Luffy, you have to be strong enough to stand on your own, and Hancock more than fits that requirement. There's also an emotional side to this for me. Boa Hancock is my favorite character in One Piece, after Luffy. Her mix of overwhelming strength, comedy, and the way she completely loses her composure around Luffy has always been incredibly entertaining to me. But this relationship isn't just about humor. Hancock's admiration for Luffy develops without knowing who he is, or being impressed by his fame. That, to me, makes this theory feel much purer and stronger. So among these 4 theories, Boa Hancock is clearly my favorite. It has canon grounding, compatible character dynamics, and a finale that could genuinely make you say, yeah, that makes sense. The idea of a partner who doesn't restrict Luffy's freedom, doesn't chain him down, but stands beside him. That role fits Hancock better than anyone else, in my opinion. The Yamato theory skyrocketed in popularity after the Wano arc. When you spend even a little time online on Reddit, Twitter, or YouTube comments, you see Yamato's name come up constantly. And the biggest reason for this is simple. Yamato's energy is incredibly similar to Luffy's. Her love of freedom, passion for adventure, desire for strength, and worldview almost perfectly align with his. That's why many people see Yamato as someone who could truly walk side by side with Luffy. The strongest argument from Yamato supporters is that this wouldn't be a balanced relationship, but a partnership. One doesn't complete the other. They're both already strong on their own. Just like Luffy never gives up his path, Yamato is also a character who refuses to compromise her freedom. That makes her a very logical answer to the question, if Luffy ever married, who wouldn't restrict him? My stance on this theory is this. After Boa Hancock, Yamato is my favorite option. She's strong, funny, and completely on the same wavelength as Luffy. In many scenes, it genuinely feels like two Luffys standing next to each other. Sometimes I even think of Yamato as the female version of Luffy. The same innocence, the same courage, the same I don't care what's in my way attitude. Because of that, this pairing never feels ridiculous to me. However, there is an important difference here. The bond between Yamato and Luffy feels more like camaraderie and admiration than romance. Yamato looks at Luffy as someone like Odin, a symbol of freedom. That places the relationship in a much grayer area when it comes to romance. Unlike Hancock, there isn't a clear romantic intent here, more of a two souls who could share an adventure vibe. Still, among these theories, Yamato represents one of the most open and freedom-focused possibilities. If Luffy ends up with someone and that relationship is portrayed less as a traditional marriage and more as walking the road together, Yamato fits that role extremely well. That's why I don't underestimate the Yamato theory at all. It holds a very solid place on this list. The Vivi theory isn't discussed as loudly as the first three, but during my research it kept coming up as a never-forgotten option within the fandom. Especially longtime One Piece fans and those emotionally attached to the Alabasta era almost always include Vivi when listing potential names. Because Vivi enters Luffy's life very early and helps shape his understanding of leadership and responsibility. For some fans, Vivi represents one of the most special bonds from Luffy's past. The strongest argument from Vivi supporters is this. Vivi is one of the people who knew Luffy before he became anything close to the Pirate King. No overwhelming power, no Yonko-level reputation. Vivi saw Luffy exactly as he was, unaffected by his fame, strength, or title. For some fans, this makes their bond feel very pure and clean. Combined with Vivi's royal background and the world-shaping events of the finale, some believe this pairing could be powerful both politically and symbolically. But when it comes to my personal opinion, I'm very clear here. The Vivi theory has never felt strong to me. Yes, the Alabasta arc is special. Yes, Vivi is an important character. But the bond between Vivi and Luffy never felt like it was heading toward romance. It always felt more like two characters whose paths crossed and who deeply respected each other. Luffy's dynamic with Vivi never gave me the same feeling as Hancock's love or Yamato's shared energy. I also think this. By the time we reach the One Piece finale, Luffy's story will likely close around freedom, the seas, and the journey itself. Vivi, on the other hand, is tied to a kingdom, a people, and responsibility. Long term, I find it very hard to imagine these two lifestyles existing side by side. That's why the idea of Luffy marrying Vivi doesn't really sit right with me. So, to be honest, among these four theories, Vivi feels the most distant to me. I see it as even less likely than Nami. If we were to see a romantic scene between Luffy and Vivi in the finale, I'd be genuinely surprised. To me, Vivi should remain a character who represents an important chapter in Luffy's life, one whose story ends not with romance, but with respect and farewell. Nami, Boa, Hancock, Yamato, and Vivi. Each one represents a different possible version of Luffy's future. Some symbolize friendship, some freedom, and some direct love. No matter which one it is, these discussions are part of what has kept One Piece alive for so many years, and it's completely natural for these questions to grow louder as we approach the finale. Maybe in the end, Luffy won't marry anyone at all, and the story will close purely on themes of freedom and adventure. But even so, talking about these theories, imagining possibilities, and letting everyone picture their own ending is part of the magic of this series. If you enjoy One Piece theory videos like this, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And make sure to share your own opinion in the comments. See you in the next video.